this evening. Hope that everyone got a good afternoon's rest and ready to come back and worship, study the Word of God. And hopefully, as we think about the things on tap tonight, that there will be things that will be beneficial to all of us. And I want to suggest to you, as we're going to be turning our attention back to the book of Ecclesiastes, and tonight we're going to be in verses 12 through 18. So we're not going to cover a bunch of passages this evening. But I hope that we realize the depth and the importance, I should say, of the lessons learned from this wonderful book. If we get these principles that are taught in the book of Ecclesiastes right, it will change our lives for the better. We will be seeing things the way that we ought to be seeing them. Perspective is very important. And it will help us to develop the proper perspective on life. So let's just quickly, I want to reiterate, the book of Ecclesiastes reveals the value, the actual value of material things. What is that value? Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. That's what Solomon says. That's his conclusion. And in view of that, the main point of the book is then revealed. What is the end of the whole matter? Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is man's all. That is our purpose in this world. But the book is really focusing on things under the sun and their true value. And it's very important to keep that in mind as we look at each passage, as we break it down, and the statements that we find by Solomon. These things are pertaining to life under the sun and observing these things from that perspective. Tonight we're going to be talking about the vanity of striving after earthly wisdom. What value is earthly knowledge? We've got educators in this room tonight. We have men who have given their lives to education. Education has its place. There's a certain value. But I mean, if you were to compare it to the importance of spiritual matters, we must conclude these things of earthly knowledge are simply vanity. Really worthless things when you consider the overall perspective. So beginning in verse 12, I, the preacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed, all is vanity and grasping for the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. I commune with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness, and I have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge. And I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief. And he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. The vanity of earthly wisdom. Now, there is earthly knowledge pertaining to a lot of different things. The knowledge of what it takes to be a ruler, to gain people's trust and to lead, to be in power, to have and engage in pleasures of life and possessions, to gain possessions. And, you know, one of the saddest things is I know people who, they are intelligent people, but they use it to obtain wicked things and to do wicked things. And they're very smart. They can cheat the system. They can cheat the tax system. They are people who are able to cheat the law and get by with it for a time. They're not going to get by with it forever. But they use their wisdom and their intelligence to bypass the law and to do things that are wrong. And so what Solomon is saying in this is, first and foremost, he sets his heart to do something. He is focused on a task, and that task is to seek out, to search out the mysteries of life, to find out why things are as they are, to gain as much knowledge and understanding in these matters as he possibly can. And the instrument by which he investigates these things is wisdom. Now, he keeps, I do believe he retains spiritual wisdom in the background that keeps him from going too far, but he uses human wisdom and approaches things from a human perspective. And he tries to understand the end of these things from a under the sun perspective. And that's why he comes to the conclusion that he does. Vanity. All is vanity. The term wisdom itself means the application of knowledge and seeing the end of a thing. And a person who is wise is able to do just that. They're able to see the problem. They're able to ascertain how to avoid the consequences of actions, and they avoid it by not doing whatever it is that would lead them into a bad consequence. They see the end from the beginning and decide, it's not worth it. That's wisdom. Wisdom is applied knowledge. And so what Solomon is doing is he's looking at these things. What are the ends? What's the results? Let's say I do this. I gain all this money, all of these possessions. What's the end result of that? I gain this power and authority. What's the end result of that? I learn all of these things. What's the end result of that? And it is very important for us to realize there is a difference between earthly wisdom and human wisdom, and divine wisdom, heavenly wisdom. James 3 talks about those two types of wisdom. Earthly wisdom is concerned about the things in this world. Divine wisdom gives us an insight which we cannot see if we're just relegated to the things in this world. If our knowledge and our instruction is just based on the things we can see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, it's a limited amount of knowledge. But God shines the light on these things as to their true value, their true purpose. God's word helps us to understand the things that we need to know and understand to please Him, whereas human wisdom is just really filled with a bunch of things that wind up meaning nothing, and the value of those things being nothing. We determine our values, what's important to us, what our goals are. And so it's very important that we start out with the proper premise, the proper perspective on life. If we are looking at life from what I can get in this life out of it, I'm looking at it from the wrong perspective. What I need to do is I need to measure everything by God's divine standard and by an eternal standard. And then I can tell, well, this isn't worth losing my soul over. In fact, there's nothing worth losing your soul over. If you should gain the whole world and lose your own soul, what has it profited you? We all know the answer to that question. We, though, determine the values that we have. Jesus talks about this in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 20, doesn't he? Lay up for your treasures where? In heaven. Now, where do most people lay their treasures up? Right here on the earth. And what happens to those things? All of those things. They're destroyed. We lose them. There's nothing that we can gain here, that we can have here, that we can enjoy here, that we're going to take with us in the by and by. Nothing. It's all going to be gone. We need to lay for ourselves treasures in heaven. And we need to focus on those things. Jesus talks about the eye being single. And so that's talking about the focus that we are to have on these things that are spiritual, not the things that are temporal, not the things that are earthly. So our perspective is extremely important. To whom will we be loyal? Jesus talks about that in Matthew 6 as well. You cannot serve both God and mammon. You got to make a choice. Am I going to serve God or not? And by the way, we all choose. There's no way around that. It is incumbent upon us to choose. We all have the right and the free will to choose, but we do not have the free will not to choose. We will all choose. Solomon says this burdensome task God has given to the sons of man. This Hebrew term appears often in this book, but it's not found anywhere else in the Old Testament. And it implies a distracting busyness, engrossing occupation. In other words, it takes up all of our time. And what is this task? Well, to find out the whys and the hows of things in this world. And God has given that to us, but he realizes, and he has a purpose for that. But it's not the purpose that most people find. Most people place all their marbles in that cart. They put everything, all their eggs in that basket. I got to find out all the things under the sun, and why they work, and what's this, and what's that, and what's it for. When God tells us, and he doesn't want us to waste all of our time on those things. In fact, his purpose is that we come to learn humility from that. It's interesting. I actually put this chart up back here in the back one Sunday morning a while back. And Isaac was talking about one of these animals. I don't even remember which one it was. I think it was that one right there. And it was an animal unique to Australia. It's very poisonous. And he told me all about this animal. I didn't know anything about it. But I asked Isaac, I said, okay, Isaac, that's good. Did you know all of that stuff about that animal? Now, how does that help you? I guess if you ever go to Australia, you'll know that if you see that thing, not to pick it up. But if you don't go to Australia, it's not going to do you any good. Not really. We may know all there is to know about all of these critters that are on this world and everything there is about them. But the reality is we'll never know everything there is about them. We're always learning new things. We're always finding new things. And not only is the quest for this understanding endless, in the end, it is also meaningless. So I know everything there is to know about a lion and why a lion does what a lion does. That's really not going to help me unless I'm really, in the den with the lions like that. Well, you understand, okay? But we find ourselves so interested and invested in these things. And this is what Solomon says about it. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of men by which they may be exercised. Notice Young's literal translation of this. It is a sad travail God hath given to the sons of man to be humbled by it. When we begin to realize that, we can search and search and search, we're never going to find the end of this. What it does is it magnifies our Creator and exposes his great power and his wisdom, the depth of his wisdom and knowledge, and how little we really do know, and how little we really are. That's the purpose of these things. God did give us this. He has placed within our hearts the ability and the desire to know things. Where did we come from? What's our purpose? Where are we going? What is our destiny? Monkeys don't think like that. Neither do dogs. But God has put that in us. And so there is a curiosity that is within us. And so we seek things out. Now, if we're seeking these things out and gaining the proper understanding that, wow, how big is our God? We're using it right. And how little we are, we're using it right. But if we're using it to think, wow, how smart we are, look at what all we've found out, we're not utilizing the things of this world properly. Solomon says the sons of men, this is not just his covenant people. This is what he's given man to do. And you can see this, you know this. I mean, man has reached out into the stars. We're looking at Mars even, and they're talking about sending spacecraft out to Mars. We're very interested in the universe around us. But again, what are we going to find? What again we need to learn is, wow, how small we are. How much we depend on God. And what is truly valuable. Because when we really look at the things in this world, we realize they are all just temporary things. Everything that we can see, hear, smell, taste, and touch is simply temporary. It's made of dust. Solomon says, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. Indeed. Wow, everything is meaningless. If you're looking at it solely from a human perspective, yes, meaningless. If we use these things to gain the proper instruction from them, they have their purpose and we found it. No matter how thoroughly a person investigates a thing, it's going to be a fruitless endeavor to know everything there is to know about that thing. It's not going to benefit us in the long run. So, Solomon comes to this unavoidable conclusion. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. Well, what does that mean? Well, we've straightened things before. Just because a thing's crooked doesn't mean it has to stay crooked. We can straighten it out. If we have enough heat or enough pressure applied to it, we can make it straight again. No, there are some things, my friend, you cannot make straight that God has made crooked. It's just impossible. Life presents many problems for which there are no answers. We cannot explain them, nor can we fix them. And when he talks about a number that is lacking, the greatest mathematician cannot add figures which do not exist. There will always be unresolved problems in this world. As much as we try to solve the world's problem, there will always be problems. That's just the simple way of life. There will always be wars. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody stopped hating each other and everyone started loving each other and we had utopia on the earth? When is that going to happen? Never. There will always be wars. When are we going to cure all of the diseases that exist in the world? Never. We might find a cure for one, but guess what? We maybe even in the process of curing one, we create another one. What about natural disasters? Are we going to be able to stop hurricanes, tornadoes, and earthquakes, wildfires? What about the poor? Jesus himself said in John 12 and verse 8, the poor you always have with you. There will always be problems, unresolvable, unfixable problems. There will be questions that we ask that will never be answered this side of eternity. So that's where we are. What is crooked cannot be made straight. There are so many things in this world that cannot be fixed. Government can't fix them. You can take all the money in the world, you can't fix them. Can't solve them. You can't make people who have hated each other for 5,000 years all of a sudden get along. It just isn't going to work. I wish it was that we could, but it's not. And something else, that which is crooked cannot be made straight. I'll tell you something else. What God has said, what God has ordained cannot be changed. Now, certainly, we should not take the Calvinistic extreme in which They believe that God has ordained all things that come to pass. Now, I don't believe that. The Bible doesn't teach it. But there are things that God has ordained. No man could have stopped Jesus dying on the cross. God had purposed that. He determined that. It was going to happen. He used wicked men to accomplish his purpose. God did not make them wicked. God used the wicked to accomplish his purpose. We cannot change what God has predetermined, what God has purposed, what God has decreed. We cannot change his word. We cannot change his promises. We cannot change his judgments. Isn't that true? People today, they feel like they can do pretty much what they want when it comes to their worship and their service to God. They can take liberty with his word. Well, no, we can't. We can't change what God has said. What God has promised to the faithful, listen, God is going to keep. All things do indeed work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28. That is true. And there's nobody that will ever be able to change that. I'll tell you something else. You go back to the book of Romans in chapter 2. What's going to happen to the impenitent? God is going to punish them. God keeps his promises, both of good and bad. He's going to do what he said he's going to do. And his judgments, what God has deemed as wrong, will always be wrong. And man's not able to change that. Our culture cannot make homosexuality acceptable to God. Can't do that. It is wrong. It is abominable in the sight of God. And not all the preachers in the world are able to change that. It is what it is. In fact, that's a very important saying. And we all, I think, and deep down, we know it. It is what it is. We can't change so many things. It's just the reality of life. It's the reality of our circumstances. We can't change that. Now, we do, again, have the right to choose God and his way, his will, his promises, his judgments, or not. We have the right to choose, but we do not have the right not to choose. Just as Moses said in Deuteronomy 30 and verse 19, I said before you life and death. Choose life. You got the choice to choose. Now, we can't change the standards that God has set forth for life. We have to accept life on his terms, not ours. We must choose. Choose you this day whom you will serve. Joshua 24 and verse 15. Or Romans 6 and verses 16 and 17. You're the servants to whomsoever you yield yourself, servants, to obey, whether sin unto death or obedience unto righteousness. Listen, we can't change God's will. And we can call our rebellion righteousness all day long. It's not going to turn our rebellion into righteousness. We have to do things God's way. The reality is the time is coming. We will all die. We will all be held accountable before him for how we lived our lives. And there's no getting around that. There's no escaping that. That is something that God has purposed. It's going to happen. The judgment day is coming. You know, you've always heard there are two things you cannot avoid or escape: death and taxes. My friend, I know people who have avoided taxes, but no one's going to avoid death. And I'll give you the second thing: judgment. Hebrews 9 verse 27. It is appointed unto man once to die. After this, the judgment. No one's going to avoid that. So Solomon recognizes that there are things that God has established that cannot be changed. In verse 16, Solomon says, I commune with my heart, saying, look, I have gained or attained greatness, and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge. So Solomon is saying, look at what I found. You know, I found great success. I've gotten all this wisdom. And what has it accomplished for me? I still haven't been able to find all the answers. The smartest man in the world doesn't have all the answers. Never will. And Solomon understood that. And so I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Wow. There is so much here if you just stop and think about it. As Solomon left no stone unturned in his quest for understanding, what he found out was that he can't find it all. And what he did find caused him to be unsettled, uncomfortable, and even sorrowful. He learned madness. He searched out madness. He experienced madness to a degree. He learned it. The Hebrew word says, and the folly, which means vice or wickedness, he knew vice and wickedness. And his conclusion was, produce nothing of lasting value. I'm just chasing the wind. I'm wasting my time spinning my wheels, whatever metaphor you want to use or euphemism, whatever you want to say about that. We all know what that means. It produces nothing of value. And so Solomon, even though he's increased in his knowledge, he finds this vexation of spirit, this irritation. He finds great sorrow. And you know what? I think that we who are experiencing this technological boom, this information boom, I think I was much happier back in the 80s when you didn't have cell phones and, you didn't have the internet. You didn't know all the stuff that you know now. I think I was a lot happier back then. And to know, the more that we know, the more we realize that this world isn't a good place. We become more conscious of not only the evils that exist in the world, but even also our own ignorance and what we didn't know and how much we don't know. And again, I think that's the purpose for all of this. God has set this in front of us, and we can investigate, we can seek it out, but we're never going to find the end, and that he hopes will humble us and cause us to turn back to him who has all the answers. I do believe that's the point. Solomon learned that the more that you know, the more responsibility you have. The more that you know, the more burdens there are to bear. The more that you know, the more conscious you are of reality. You are more conscious of your own limitations and the limitations of mankind, and you are conscious of the dangers of your own ignorance and how you can do so many things that you shouldn't do. It's interesting as science goes on, we find out. I always thought that eating oatmeal was healthy. I thought it was great. I love oatmeal. I'd eat it every morning if I could. Well, come to find out, oatmeal's not good for you. What I'm being told. It's fattening for it, and I think maybe that's part of my problem, oatmeal. I think that's some of my issue. It's got all these pesticides and stuff in it, so you got all this poison going into your system. Okay, so the more that you learn, and science, it learns it too, right? And we're finding these things out, and we realize all the mistakes we've made, all the bad decisions that we've made, and the terrible things we've done. An increase of knowledge and wisdom is not a good thing from that perspective, if we're just talking about material things. But, okay, if we use this for God's glory and for recognizing who God is and who we really are, and it's humbling to us and causing us to seek God out, then it's accomplished its purpose in our life. Sadly, most people don't come to understand that. There are areas in human existence where our efforts are completely and proven to be completely futile. We can't change things. We cannot control things. There are so many things still beyond our grasp, and they always will be. And we search for human wisdom, and we find all the problems. We find out what we don't know, and then what we do know and what we learn causes us more grief and more sorrow, and it's just not healthy. And we spend our time like a hamster on a wheel, constantly chasing these things, and we never get anywhere. So, what again we need to realize is the futility of chasing after these things, and come to learn our need to seek and serve God with our whole heart. And what we need to realize is we don't have to understand everything in this world. All we have to do is place our trust in God, who perfectly understands everything in this world, as He is the one who has made it all. And regardless of what happens, I'm going to place my life in His hands and allow Him to guide me, guard me, and keep me, and save me. Now, that's all I need to worry about, really, in life. We have all that we need in Christ. There's nothing wrong with knowing the answers to things in this world and finding problems and trying to help our fellow man and our neighbor. But we all must realize that these things, we'll always have problems. And so this kind of helps us focus in our perspective in life. What's really important? What's really valuable in life? It's not this world. And we can spend so much time trying to find the answers to all of our problems that we completely ignore our biggest problem, and that is sin. And we ignore the one who can fix that problem, and that is God. And we refuse to come to Him in humility. We spend our times chasing the wind. Well, that's some things that we can learn just from those few verses from the book of Ecclesiastes, and there's so much more. Lord willing, we'll pick that up in a couple of weeks. But for now, if you're here tonight and you've never rendered obedience to the gospel of Jesus Christ, again, He's all that you really need. You don't need anything else. If you've got Jesus and you're serving Him faithfully, you have all that's really valuable in this world. And you'll have all that there is for eternity, which I tell you, you get on the other side of this life. You find yourself at the end of your life and standing before Jesus. I assure you, not a single person will ever, and that's out of all the people in the world, historically and in the future, not a single person is going to stand before the Lord on the day of judgment and wish that they had more money in their bank account. Not a single one. But we will realize then what was truly valuable in our life. And if we have been faithful to the Lord, that's all that matters. If we can help you tonight, if you need to be baptized for the remission of your sins, if you need to confess your sins and ask for the prayers of the church, whatever your need may be, won't you come while together we stand, while we sing. God.